Remember the whole knit you together and knew everything about you before you were born thing? God knew. God knew that even though Gideon wasn't doing what he was created to be at that moment, God still knew what he was created to do. And it might take some work, and it did, to convince Gideon that he really was created to be a mighty warrior. God told Gideon that his army of 32,000 men was too big for the battle he was going into. Can you imagine? Sorry, it's not fair. You have too many. Well, you want to win, don't you? It is a war. Sorry, 32,000 is too many, so God whittled it down. And by the time he got finished, that 32,000 had become 300. And the Midianite army was as many as 135,000. So 32,000 didn't sound like too many to me. But God thought 300 was just enough. Because God knew something Gideon didn't know. God knew something that we don't recognize a lot of the times. It doesn't matter how many of us there are as long as there's one of him. And because God was going ahead of him and God was going with him, it didn't matter if Gideon went by himself. Because God knew he was going to win. And it's so true in our life in so many situations. It is that moment when we feel the weakest. It is that moment when we feel the most helpless. And God shows up and we recognize just exactly who he is. Because if we had enough men to fight that battle and didn't need any help, why would we need God? But because Gideon was faithful and did what God asked him to do, regardless of how little sense it made, because it really didn't make a lot of sense at face value, God made Gideon into that mighty warrior. It was after God found Gideon hiding under the ground that he finally became who God knew he was created to become. And just so you know, you familiar with the book of Hebrews chapter 11? We call it the Hall of Faith. Guess who's listed? Gideon. He's listed in the Hall of Faith. This guy who started out hiding from the enemy and a few days later defeats that same enemy because God is with him. And God says, you're a mighty warrior regardless of what you think and regardless of what they think. All that matters is what I know.